Hey, good Tuesday evening, everybody. I'm KHOU11 meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with your tropical update. We're mainly focused on Hurricane Idalia as it's within 12 hours of making landfall along the nature coast of Florida's Gulf Coast. And it's going to be pretty impactful. Category 2 right now, 105 mile per hour wind, so it has strengthened significantly and it has satisfied the definition for rapid intensification. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. Category 3, Franklin, has weakened some. It was teetering on a Category 5 with 150 mile per hour winds yesterday, making it a strong Category 4, heading away from land and in the open Atlantic. Idalia's new track here at 7 p.m., 105 mile per hour winds. It is picking up pace to the north, 16 miles per hour. That's a pretty good clip. And it's expected to peak at a Category 3. That would make it a major hurricane with 115 mile per hour winds. Now, the possibility of this overperforming, I think, is quite high. It's got a lot of ocean heat content to work with, a lot of energy that's available, and overall environmental conditions are ideal for this to intensify much further than what's forecast before it makes landfall. Thankfully, the window of time over water is now closing in on 12 hours, so it's not a tremendous amount of time, but enough to make more than a 10 mile per hour jump from where it currently is. So I think it could be a little bit stronger upon landfall, and as we talked about in yesterday's video, it will likely be intensifying right up until it loses its energy source, which is at landfall. By the way, landfall's definition is when the center of the surface circulation intersects with the coastline, and that'll likely occur around sunrise tomorrow morning on Wednesday. We're not done with Idalia after landfall in Florida. Then it starts to impact southeast Georgia, coastal areas of the Carolinas, really kind of tracking right along the coastline there, still maintaining tropical storm status, a moderate tropical storm at that, 60 mile per hour winds, and keep in mind it's heading basically east-northeast. So areas out to the east-northeast of it are going to be getting the onshore winds from this, so ongoing storm surge potential, especially Charleston. Very susceptible to storm surge flooding there, and we'll likely see that on top of freshwater flooding. Some of these areas could see over 6 inches of rain. And I also want to step back here actually and show you this here after we get past this. You notice how it goes out in time and the cone is very narrow here with high confidence of the forecast. I want to show you what happens here on the tail end as we get way out to the end of the week and into the weekend. Notice it's narrow and then you get a bulb here. Why? Confidence goes way down because the spaghetti plots show 2 separate outcomes here, and I'm going to show you those coming up in just a little bit. Here's a look at infrared satellite of Hurricane Idalia. 105 mile per hour winds, again moving to the north, pressure steadily dropping. It dropped 7 millibars from the last update. Recon finding a deepening storm. Infrared satellite imagery here, if you remember, shows us the temperature of the cloud tops, the white shades here, and some pops of pink are extremely cold cloud tops, meaning they're very strong thunderstorms. And in the last couple of frames here, we're starting to see an eye warm and clear out. Also, when you see those pops of pink, that's what we call vortical hot towers. And what those are is just exceptionally strong convective activity, thunderstorms that punch through the general eye wall center here. So we're seeing that is an indicator of rapidly intensifying tropical systems. So we've got that there right now, and there is an eye starting to warm and clear on out as it lifts towards the north at a pretty good clip. No dry air anywhere near this system. We talked about this yesterday. If dry air were to be entrained, that would choke it off and prevent further strengthening. That is not going to be occurring here. The only thing that would weaken this is if it intensifies so much before landfall that it starts to undergo something called an eye wall replacement cycle. That's when the eye basically collapses in on itself and then a larger eye builds in to replace it. But in that time that it takes to do that, it leads to a period of at least plateau of strength or even some weakening. So that's about all that we're looking at here with overall environmental conditions. Very, very ideal. Let's verify how the forecast has been doing here with current radar trends. So we're within radar range of Tampa Bay in Florida. Here's the center of Hurricane Idalia. This is a 3-hour radar loop. This is the past track already. This is the forecast track and cone going out a little bit farther in time. Take note here of where the center of Idalia is tracking, favoring the eastern side of that forecast cone. Now, I don't want you to really worry about that because when we get intensifying tropical systems like this, they tend to wobble. It's something called trochoidal oscillation. Big word, but basically it's the word for the wobble. And that's what's going on here, I think. I don't think this is a trend that's going to be pushing farther to the east. Is it still a possibility? Sure. But it looks to be staying within here. Remember, the cone is where the center of systems stay 2/3 of the time. So there's 1/3 of the time that this tracks outside of that. And of course, as we've talked more and more about, impacts are way outside of that forecast cone, like we're seeing with the outer bands lashing the coast of Florida. We've already seen numerous tornado warnings because we have that spin in the atmosphere already from this tropical system. Here's a larger picture of that. You can really see that eye wall taking shape here. We're about 139 miles now to the southwest of Tampa. And right in here, the eye wall is where you're going to find the strongest of the winds. That's the most likely area that you'll find 105 mile per hour winds. Thankfully, that is well offshore. Not seeing much winds here, but when you get the outermost bands, you get some gusty squalls that could certainly bring hurricane force gusts, certainly tropical storm force winds there, and of course our tornado threat and very, very heavy rain. All right, that live radar shows you where it's heading. It's kicking to the north as a Category 2. Out ahead of it still lies some very warm waters, very warm, deep waters, which leads more so to the possibility of rapid intensification. And I know we've been talking a lot about that. I'm sure you've heard this word thrown about, but what exactly does that mean? What does it mean to be a rapidly intensifying tropical system? Well, it has to satisfy a definition from the National Hurricane Center. It's an increase in maximum sustained winds of 30 knots or around 34 miles per hour in a 24-hour window of time. Let's look back at Idalia's last 24 hours of advisories from the National Hurricane Center. We go back to 8 p.m. yesterday, 70 mile per hour tropical storm. 8 p.m. today, 105 mile per hour Category 2 hurricane. We satisfied the definition for rapid intensification, an increase of over 34 miles per hour. 35 mile per hour increase in sustained winds there. So we have a rapidly intensifying system in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. How are winds looking currently? At the recording of this video, we're not seeing much in the way of strong winds. Remember, it's still about 180 miles off the coast to the west of Florida and tracking due north, so the strongest of the winds are still offshore. We are, however, getting onshore winds in certain areas, so that means storm surge is already underway, and that storm surge is basically the storm blowing water, blowing the ocean into low-lying areas. It's basically what it's doing, and flooding it. Here's a look at forecast wind gust potential starting today at 10 p.m. Already getting tropical storm force winds, if not greater than that, all along the Gulf Coast of Florida, up into the Nature Coast and the Big Bend area. Going forward to around midnight, those gusts start to get a little stronger, over 60 miles per hour near the Tampa Bay area. And by around sunrise tomorrow, when we're expecting a landfall, we could certainly see 90, 95, 100 mile per hour wind gusts, if not stronger. Again, I think this model in particular is underdoing it, especially if we get further intensification and the deepening, the lowering of the central pressure of this, increasing the wind speeds. Especially at landfall location right over here, it could be well over 100 miles per hour. It moves over land, the wind field begins to spread on out and heads up into southeast Georgia and the Carolinas to wreak havoc there as well. So let's talk the impacts in Florida first. 5 to 10 inches of rain possible. Freshwater flooding, a possibility on top of storm surge. Winds, 100 mile per hour possible gusts, easily, especially along coastal areas near that storm center. Storm surge, this will be the most impactful. If you remember Ian last year, 10 to 15 foot storm surge was predicted and verified in those areas. They're forecasting that again, but for a different area of Florida. And again, depends exactly on the landfall location. Areas that see that 15-foot storm surge due east directly of that center at landfall. We'll see those highest storm surge values, and that tornado risk east of the center. Again, we've already seen that verified today. High-res models here starting things off currently. We've got it pretty much verifying, initializing well. We've got the eye showing up here on high-res imagery, lifting pretty much north with a slight easterly component, especially as it really deepens ahead of landfall, giving it a little bit of a tug more to the east. 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, potentially right at landfall, right around sunrise. This looks to be just to the northwest of Cedar Key, Nature Coast, Big Bend area seeing the biggest impacts here. By the way, as a major hurricane making landfall in this area, it's rare. Okay, it is Florida. You think, they get them, sure, all the time. Not so much the case. Just down the road here, off to the west, you remember Michael, back several years back, that popped Cat 4, Cat 5 at landfall, caused a ton of damage just down the coast off to the west here. This looks to be farther to the east in the Big Bend area, an area that hasn't seen a storm this impactful in a long time. Moves up and over southeast Georgia into the Carolinas and still bringing the onshore winds here off to the northeast of that storm center, meaning storm surge up through the Outer Banks potentially, down to Myrtle Beach, Charleston, and even Savannah as it tracks to the east-northeast. Storm surge watches and warnings, mostly all of these have been upgraded to warnings. And on top of this, there's an increased risk because we've got a full moon. That means astronomical high tides. In the Gulf of Mexico, it's not so much pronounced as it is in the Atlantic, but still it just adds that much more water that can come up and over with those strong gusty winds coming onshore that extend storm surge warnings all the way up into the areas that will likely see 10 to 15 feet of storm surge inundation. These areas here, again, it's really dependent on the exact landfall location because areas just to the east of that landfall will get the strongest winds onshore piling up that water. 4 to 7 foot storm surge possible in the Tampa Bay area when they get that onshore wind piling that water into the bay, and farther off to the south, areas like Fort Myers that saw that 10 to 15 foot storm surge with Ian we'll still see a surge, but not nearly as bad, thankfully. 2 to 4 foot storm surge forecast there. The tornado threat is still present, and in fact, over a larger area, pretty much all along into the east of the storm track there, for that overall spin in the atmosphere and that tornadic possibility in some of those spinning cells. Rainfall, too. Freshwater flooding is going to be a big issue. Look at some of these numbers here up to Tallahassee. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 inches of rain spreading all the way to coastal Carolina, south of Hatteras and the Outer Banks there. Remember I talked about that bulb at the end of the computer models for the forecast track from the National Hurricane Center for Idalia? This is why. Confidence goes right down as we get past 5 days because the computer models do this, really a split. Some of them say they catch the exit clause and heading off to the north, out into the open Atlantic, not an issue. Some say it misses that exit window and then gets tossed farther to the south and it kind of meanders and even tries to build its way back towards the east coast of Florida this time around. Will it be a hurricane? Most likely not. But again, the waters here in the southwest Atlantic are very, very warm, so we'll have to watch anything. And any remnant circulation already has a head start. Look at that. Just got the update there. Still shows that split. There's not high model confidence that far out, but certainly high confidence with the landfall location later tonight, early tomorrow morning in the Big Bend of Florida. Let's talk briefly about Franklin, 125 mile per hour winds. Huge eye with this, throwing a lot of big time surf conditions along the east coast of the United States and high rip current risk stretching all the way up into New England right into this upcoming weekend. Labor Day weekend. Keep that in mind. Here's a look at the forecast track. Takes it farther and farther away from land, but man, those waves will propagate outwards and they will be impacting beach areas up along the East Coast for the next several days to come, not to mention Bermuda as well. Active basin, Idalia, Franklin, a new tropical depression, which, by the way, doesn't look to do much, staying out in the open Atlantic, and another wave coming off the coast of Africa has a 50-50 chance of developing into another named system, but looks like that trajectory is a little bit farther to the north and west. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Keep in touch. If you have any questions, we're on all the social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.